Thank you. The next item of business is the members' business debate on motion 19504 in the name of Claire Baker on non-fatal strangulation laws and intimate partner homicides. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Claire Baker to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank the members who signed my motions that could be debated today. I would particularly like to thank Tess White and Michelle Thompson, who I've worked with to raise the profile of non-fatal strangulation. And as both members have indicated that they are not seeking re-election, I wish to recognise their commitment to fighting violence against women and girls in Scotland. I look forward to hearing their contributions and others from across the Chamber this afternoon. At the outset, I want to commend the researchers whose work has prompted this debate. Led by Professors Sonia Office and Clement Quintana Dominique of the University of Exeter, the research on intimate partner homicide and non-fatal strangulation is not only academically rigorous but profoundly human in its implications. Their work has brought new evidence into focus, and it gives renewed urgency to this discussion. Non-fatal strangulation is not a new concern. It is an issue that I and others have been raising in this Parliament for a number of years, with successive Justice Secretaries and First Ministers, as well as in debates and questions. The normalisation of non-fatal strangulation driven by pornography should be challenged. I welcome the intention of the Online Safety Act to outlaw choking in online pornography, making it a priority offence. The Institute for Addressing Strangulation has carried out 2 surveys, and in less than a year, of those aged 16 to 34, who reported being choked during sex, saw an increase from 35% to 51% of people. While 70% of people said that consent was established before choking and 38% reported that they enjoyed it, 27% said there was no consent and 36% felt scared by the action. While the focus of today's debate is the research which seeks to strengthen the legal framework, we do have to recognise the IFS research, which shows that 29% think there are safe ways to strangle, 38% enjoy it, and 18% think it's a normal part of sex. We can legislate more, but that won't necessarily stop non-fatal strangulation in intimate relationships. Non-fatal strangulation is not risk-free. It can cause serious internal injury, brain damage or loss of consciousness within seconds. It can cause incontinence, coughing, neck pain, confusion and can lead to anxiety and depression. But it may not leave visible marks, and that absence of visible injury can affect how incidences are recorded, investigated or prosecuted. It can be used as a tool of control and coercion, and survivors describe how terrifying the experience can be, not only because of the physical danger, but also because of what it represents, an assertion of total control over breath, over consciousness, over life. As a Parliament and as a society, are we prepared to challenge the normalisation of strangulation within sexual relationships, and what are we going to do about it? In 2019, research for BBC Radio 5 Live found that a third of women under 40 had experienced unwanted slapping, choking, gagging or spitting during consensual sex, with the Centre for Women's Justice said the findings showed the growing pressure on young women to consent to violent, dangerous and demeaning acts. I have pressed the Scottish Government to undertake research into the normalisation of violence and sexual activity, including choking, reflecting the evidence and unease that acts carry a high risk of serious harm are being continually framed as routine or expected. In Scotland, there should be a multidisciplinary approach which encompasses public health, education and justice. It would appear that that is not the case, and that there is very little recognition of the prevalence of this practice and its consequences. Non-fatal strangulation in intimate partner relationships is too often minimised, misunderstood or treated as a lesser form of assault. But the evidence being presented today does often recognise it as a strong predictor of future lethal violence. Consent does not exist in a vacuum, and where there is fear, coercion, power imbalance and risk of serious harm, the concept of consent becomes problematic. The survey shows that people consent to being strangled or strangling others because their partner enjoys it, not necessarily because they enjoy it. Treating strangulation as normal, mutual or harmless risk obscuring abuse and silencing victims. The research highlighted in today's motion reinforces why this matters. It is the first known international study to examine the impact of standalone non-fatal strangulation laws on intimate partner homicide rates across multiple jurisdictions, and its findings are striking. In US states where non-fatal strangulation has been criminalised as a distinct serious offence, intimate partner homicides fell by double-digit percentages. Female victim homicides declined by around 14% and male victim homicides fell by 27%. The researchers estimate that more than 1,500 lives have been saved as a result of these laws. These represent people, overwhelmingly, though not exclusively women, who are alive today because earlier intimate relationship violence was recognised, taken seriously and interrupted before it escalated into something fatal. They suggest that when the law clearly recognises non-fatal strangulation as a serious, dangerous and criminal in its own right, it can disrupt patterns of escalation and coercive control. Scotland has made important progress in recognising domestic abuse as a pattern of behaviour, not a series of isolated incidents. But the evidence raises a legitimate and pressing question. Does our current law sufficiently recognise non-fatal strangulation within that framework, or is there a gap that leaves victims at risk? We should examine whether our existing offences adequately capture the harm, the risk and the intent associated with non-fatal strangulation. In a previous meeting that myself and Tess White sponsored, the Office of the Procurator Fiscal set out the argument that you can't consent to harm in Scotland, and so the offence already exists. I accepted this and I would be reluctant to legislate unnecessarily. However, the research from the University of Exeter does add more weight to the calls for a standalone offence. If criminalising non-fatal strangulation as a standalone offence could help prevent escalation, improve recording and prosecution and ultimately save lives, then I believe this Parliament has a responsibility to consider it. We should engage seriously with the evidence before us and ask whether our existing offences capture the reality of harm, risk and intent associated with strangulation, particularly when there are no visible injuries and no weapon. I want to close by acknowledging the survivors and advocacy organisations who have long highlighted non-fatal strangulation as a critical issue. They are often sharing their lived experience at a time when it is unfashionable to challenge this culture, and there's a minimisation of the experience that being strangled can be terrifying, life-threatening and never minor. This debate reflects a conversation that has been building in this chamber for a few years, and I hope it marks the point at which we move from recognising the problem to actively exploring solutions, which should be grounded in evidence, informed by survivors and driven by the shared aim of preventing a further loss of life. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Baker. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Michelle Thompson to be followed by Tess White. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too thank Claire Baker for her work in this matter and obtaining this debate, and accord my own respects to the power of collaborative cross-party working. Today I want to speak a little bit more. Hang on, my machine is having a little wobbly. I want to speak a little bit more about the research paper Disrupting Violence, Protecting Lives, Strangulation Laws and Intimate Partner Homicides. It's very compelling and it shows beyond reasonable doubt that treating non-fatal strangulation as a standalone criminal offence saves lives. The paper analyses nearly 30 years of data linking non-fatal strangulation laws across the United States with detailed homicide statistics. And the researchers show that where non-fatal strangulation laws were introduced, intimate partner homicides fell dramatically. Among adults aged 18 to 49, the age group most affected, US states saw a 14% reduction in female intimate partner homicide and a 27% reduction in male intimate partner homicide, compared to with what would have otherwise occurred. So these are not modelling assumptions or advocacy claims. They are causal effects derived from a rigorous two-stage difference in differences methodology. And the study goes further. It finds no similar reductions in killings by strangers, which tells us that the laws did not simply coincide with wider crime declines. Instead, the drop is specific, targeted and clearly linked to non-fatal strangulation legislation. Why do we care? We care because non-fatal strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of later homicide. We know it often leaves little visible injury. Historically, it's been treated as a simple assault. And the research explains that this legal vacuum had fatal consequences. Victims would be nearly killed, yet police could often charge only a minor offence. And this, of course, had the effect of weakening justice responses and sending the wrong messages to perpetrators and left the victims exposed. So where laws were introduced, things change. And the study shows that police classify more intimate partner violence cases as aggravated assault, and arrest rates for aggravated IPV increase, especially for the women most exposed. In other words, the law empowers earlier, stronger intervention, breaking the pathway from non-fatal strangulation to homicide. So, presiding officer, the evidence is clear. A standalone, non-fatal strangulation offence saves lives. And we know in Scotland we do not yet have such an offence. And I know that the Scottish Government has stated that it doesn't believe a standalone offence is necessary at this time, making various arguments around existing assault and attempted murder laws and so on. And I know also that ministers have said they'll keep the matter under review, but I believe the current legal framework is insufficient. And although we may introduce additional legislative complexity, we will also improve outcomes. Fundamentally, the evidence before us shows that general assault laws do not deliver the same prevention effect. It is the specificity of the offence, the formal legal recognition of strangulation as a distinct high-risk act, that enables justice systems elsewhere to intervene earlier and more effectively. So, presiding officer, the government states it's committed to reducing violence against women and girls. But on this matter, the evidence now goes beyond principle. It is empirical. So the question for us now is simple. If we know an action proven by this research can prevent homicides, why would we wait? I believe it's time for us to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. I call Tess White to be followed by Cara Mockin. Ms White.
Special thanks to Claire Baker for raising this petition. Thank you. And also to Michelle Thompson for working on this topic over the last few years. Emily Drouet was in her first year of university when she met a boy who would go on to become her boyfriend, to strangle her, to engage in such demoralisation of her as a person that in 2016 she committed suicide. Presiding officer, Scotland is the only part of the UK that does not have non-fatal strangulation as a standalone crime. I pay tribute to Fiona Drouet for her dedication and persistence in progressing her petition on non-fatal strangulation, to Byra's Place for their insightful cross-party event with leading experts. Strangulation for sexual purposes is now part of our culture, and it's especially common in the young. Research has shown that 43% of sexually active 16 and 17-year-olds have experienced it. 35% of 16 to 34-year-olds. What was niche has now become part of the mainstream via increasingly extreme pornography. This issue has crept up on society unnoticed, with unthinkable consequences. Strangulation is a strong predictor, as we've heard today, of escalating domestic abuse and intimate harm. 1 in 4 women accessing community and refuge services in this country reported they had experienced strangulation or suffocation. Yet strangulation often leaves no visible physical injury, making it difficult to assess and prosecute under existing common law assault offences. The First Minister has said he needs the gap in the law proven for this to be made a standalone crime. But is the data on NFS actually collected in Scotland? Markers are being added to crimes if NFS has taken place, but since not always reported, there is always going to be underreporting. Many women, presiding officer, are reluctant to come forward. A standalone crime would enable awareness and data collection for women to report it to the police. But data is collected in many countries, and a research report published in December 2025 from the University of Exeter has found that a NFS law may have prevented 1,029 female intimate partner homicides. Crucially, it stops perpetrators before violence turns deadly. And as we've heard today, researchers Professor Sonia Orifice and Clement Quintana-Domecq say laws that explicitly define and criminalise non-fatal strangulation are scalable and actionable policy tool for preventing lethal acts of domestic violence. Our findings show how laws can be designed to shift enforcement earlier in the violence cycle and meaningfully enhance victim safety. Fiona Drouet, in reply to the Lord Advocate rejection of a standalone NFS crime, said, "A specific law would reinforce to health professionals, educators and frontline responders that this behaviour is a red flag for escalating harm, including homicide and suicide. It would also," she said, "support victims in recognising the seriousness of their experiences and empower them to seek help." Presiding officer, in closing, Emily Drouet was caught in the gap where the law should have been. In her name and so many others, it's time for non-fatal strangulation to be made a standalone crime in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. I now call Cara Mockin to be followed by Liam Kerr. Ms Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Claire Baker for bringing this important debate to the Chamber and for all those who have contributed so far. Can I also associate myself with the remarks made by everybody about how important the cross-party working is, particularly in this area, and of course also the quality of the research, limited research in this area, but the quality is so important. Today's motion asks Parliament to recognise and consider the benefits of creating a standalone offence for non-fatal strangulation, which in my view could see significant improvements to public awareness, to data collection and victim safety and support. Non-fatal strangulation is a severe form of domestic abuse which is predominantly carried out by men against women. It can have serious and long-term side effects, as we've heard, including brain damage, organ failure and mental health issues, and has potentially life-threatening consequences and cause extreme trauma for victims. And Tess White's contribution just shows us the shocking reality of this and why we have to highlight it. As highlighted in the motion, non-fatal strangulation often leaves no visible injuries, but it is a strong predictor of future lethal violence, and is becoming increasingly more common, as we've heard, and particularly we've heard from other contributors in younger people who may not fully understand the consequences of this. While non-fatal strangulation is prosecuted as a criminal offence in Scotland under the common law of assault, as we've already heard, the common law route for prosecution does not always work. It can fall short in fully capturing the offence. And I believe that exploring how and where improvements can be made may significantly improve outcomes for victims. You know, I think that is very important. That if we don't fully capture it, we can actually get improvements. I want to, though, of course, recognise the bold and world-leading action that the Parliament has taken to tackle violence against women and girls here in this Parliament. And I think that has been because we do work cross-party and listen to each other. So that, I think, we should have on the record. As non-fatal strangulation is currently recorded under a range of offences, as we've heard, there is an issue with recording of data and a lack of data. And I think that is quite an important element. I don't think I need to explain just how important data is, not only to understand the scale of the problem, and to increase awareness, but also, medically, as I said earlier, capturing and recording that data on strangulation is important for us to, get research and change the impacts, but individually for the victim at that point of being a victim, if they present in hospital. So it's very important that we get the data right. I think it also will help us to increase the public awareness of the dangers. There is a strong case made that a standalone law would improve education and awareness of the effects of strangulation and could help improve the long-term safety and well-being of those victims that we're talking about. Underreporting is such an issue, and so a standalone law might help us to address this if people really understood what it is that we were trying to record. I of course recognise the arguments. I was also at the round table that Claire Baker mentioned about those cautioning against introducing a standalone offence and the potential unintentional consequences. But there is also a concern that looking for a quicker alternative approach might not be as effective and may fall short in addressing the core problems. Tackling violence against women and girls must and should always be a priority here in the Parliament, and so therefore, in my view, it is absolutely worth exploring creating a standalone offence, because it could send a message. It's important for Scotland that we see this as our absolute priority. Can I thank Claire Baker and everybody for their contributions again today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mockin. I call Liam Kerr to be followed by Pauline McNeill. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Emily Drouet was a law student at Aberdeen University. Kind, compassionate, intelligent and thoughtful, Emily died in 2016 when an incident occurred following a pattern of abuse by her boyfriend, Angus Milligan. An incident initially treated as non-suspicious. It later emerged she had reported an earlier assault to the university, which included strangulation. At the time, non-fatal strangulation was poorly understood. It was often characterised as a minor assault, and police and medical professionals failed to recognise strangulation as a high-risk indicator of homicide. But we know from this report, the study referenced and the powerful motion today, that non-fatal strangulation is incredibly serious. It can directly cause internal injuries, brain injury, hypoxia. It carries a high risk of delayed death and is one of the strongest predictors of future lethal violence. And that's why the Emily Test campaign was set up, to demand that strangulation should always trigger an urgent medical response and enhanced police safeguarding, even where the victim appears outwardly unharmed. And also to be one of the many calls for non-fatal strangulation to be a standalone offence, like it has been in England and Wales since 2022 and Northern Ireland since 2023. Because it is certainly arguable that the absence of such an offence means police and prosecutors lack a clear legal category, that data collection on incidents is poor, that the seriousness of strangulation may not be sufficiently recognised or deterred, and that public awareness of the life-threatening nature of strangulation remains low. And although Police Scotland and the Crown Office recognise strangulation as a red flag for homicide risk now, absent such an offence, there is no statutory requirement that every report of strangulation should trigger an immediate medical assessment, specialist medical imaging, or specific risk or safeguarding reviews. Now, from the start, the Emily Test campaign, which can be found on emilytest.org if anyone watching is impacted or concerned from what they're hearing today, the campaign demanded action, setting out clear and articulate deliverables through means including a petition for a standalone criminal offence. And here's my biggest concern. The Petitions Committee considered that last April. The Criminal Justice Committee then examined it last summer. The Scottish Government's programme for government stated that it would carry out a comprehensive assessment of the law to determine if further action is needed. The Cabinet Secretary updated the Justice Committee in November, saying that there would be that comprehensive assessment. And the Lord Advocate wrote to Fiona Drouet, who joins us in the gallery today, in December, acknowledging the concern, explaining the current position, but giving no firm direction forward. And here we are, 11 weeks from the dissolution of this Parliament and all that that entails. And the overwhelming impression is that this issue is not being prioritised sufficiently. Nearly a decade on from Emily's tragic death, the campaign tell me they have yet to see tangible progress. So thanks to Claire Baker's motion and the report which prompted it, and all who contributed their time and expertise to it, the Minister has the chance in closing today to set out exactly what will be done to address this before May's election. She must not countenance any delays. We have a duty. We owe it to Emily and all those impacted by this vicious practice of non-fatal strangulation. Close the gaps, act now, and make sure no woman becomes another victim of this appalling violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Pauline McNeill to be followed by Monica Lennon. Ms McNeill.
Thank you to Claire Baker for bringing this motion and for taking this on in this Parliament. And to Tess White and Michelle Thompson, I just want to endorse the words of Claire Baker, that the work that Tess White and Michelle Thompson have done in violence against women is very notable in this Parliament and should be recognised. I was shocked to read that more than 20,000 victims in the UK experience strangulation every year, and I also attended the briefing that Claire hosted the Women's Support Project and Bearis Place, and it opened my eyes to something I knew very little about at the time. But it also alarmed me to learn that children were present in more than one-third of non-fatal strangulation offences, according to the UK's Crown Prosecution Service. I found that quite staggering. But what I learned at the briefing that was hosted by Claire Baker and others is that the timeline of being strangled goes like this. In 6.8 seconds, it's time to render you unconscious. In 14 seconds, it's anoxic seizure. And in 15 seconds, loss of bladder control. And only 30 seconds, loss of bowel control. And I know many others are talking about it leading to a fatality. It takes only 62 seconds before this could potentially happen. So it's clear from this timeline why non-fatal strangulation often occurs at the most dangerous stage of the escalation of violence associated with later homicide. I've been particularly concerned to read about the normalisation. Other members have talked about what's happening regarding non-fatal strangulation, often known as choking, in young people's sexual habits. Strangulation has seeped into popular culture and social media, and the Raven reports that it's been mentioned as a sexual preference on dating apps. So I believe we must act to prevent this by educating both men and women about the consequences. There have been reports that sex education providers and teachers are saying that they have been asked by children in school about how to safely choke a partner. Needless to say, there is no way to safely do something like this. I think someone already mentioned that the study found that 43% of sexually active 16 and 17-year-olds in the UK had experienced this. Pornography is cited as the most common way that young people learn about strangulation. I think addressing the harms of extreme pornography must be central to our work in violence against women and girls. And if we are to address violence against women and girls in the future, we need to confront this issue at the earliest opportunity, and especially with children, to counter these damaging portrayals. We need to be clear that violent pornography normalises harm to women and girls. I was pleased to see the amendments to the UK Crime and Policing Bill that criminalise possessing and publishing depictions of strangulation or suffocation in pornography, with duties and platforms to study the proliferation of these images. But to address the question of whether we should legislate or not, the current framework of non-fatal strangulation incidents are mainly treated as assault, which is defined under the common law as an attack on another person with evil intent. Penalties can range up to life imprisonment. Prosecutors do not require to prove visible injury or harm to secure an assault for a conviction, provided the act was intentional. But as others have said, there are challenges in tracking how prevalent this is because there's no specific standalone crime and there is currently no individual marking system to accurately count or monitor these cases across Scotland. So I think it is worth exploring, Carol Mockin talked about this, exploring whether or not data could be collated at Crown Office, at least to give us an accurate picture of the scale of the problem. Incidentally, it hasn't been mentioned in this debate, but raised with members of this Parliament, the act of stealthing, which is the intentional act of secretly removing a condom or another barrier method without consent, is also being prosecuted in our courts, and it's not a stand-alone crime. But we cannot rule it out. We have a different legal system in Scotland in relation to England, so we have more flexibility in the law, but it shouldn't be ruled out. But I do think it should be part of the 2026 new Parliament's work and should form part of the strategy on the government of the day, whoever they may be, on their work on violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. And I call Monica Lennon. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Claire Baker for securing this important debate, and to all colleagues for their contributions today, particularly to Tess White and Michelle Thompson, who have actively worked on a cross-party basis to combat violence against women and girls, a subject that is close to my own heart, but I know is important to all of us. I want to add my voice to the debate today to support calls for the creation of a standalone offence of non-fatal strangulation. We cannot ignore the growing trend of sexual strangulation that is being normalised to a large extent by pornography and harmful so-called influencers who are really taking us backwards in so many respects in society. And we cannot ignore this because of the link between intimate partner homicides and non-fatal strangulation. We need action to reduce this violence, to prevent harm, and, as we've heard powerfully from so many colleagues today, to save lives. We stand here today with more research and more knowledge than ever before. Thankfully, this research that others have touched on covers multiple jurisdictions internationally, so we're not just looking at a Scottish or a UK context. Like colleagues, I want to pay tribute to Fiona Drewy, who courageously is with us today in the gallery, and to pay tribute to Emily Test for the fantastic work across the spectrum of gender-based violence that we must tackle. And I say that not just as a politician, but also as a mother who now can sleep a little bit better at night knowing that my daughter is studying in an institution that is fully signed up to the Emily Test Charter. When Fiona and I met to discuss this work at South Lanarkshire College, again another institution that is in my parliamentary region, it just gives that extra bit of peace of mind that there is that discussion happening in our colleges or universities. But we need to do much more, and I think we all recognise that it isn't down to one minister or one department or one agency. Just like we're showing cross-party working in here today, this needs to be a partnership-wide approach. I won't talk about the really worrying statistics because I think they've been covered, although really alarmed to read the Institute for Addressing Strangulation report that it's the age of 18 to 20 is the most common age where respondents report first starting to strangle others or to be strangled. What I did notice in preparing for today is that just in December of 2025, there was a big conference in Lancashire. Ministers may know about it, but that brought together key stakeholders to really shine a spotlight on non-fatal strangulation. And if you don't know about it, Ministers, it's maybe something to look at. It'd be good to see something similar happen in Scotland, if nothing like that is already planned, and what are the public health messages that we can get out there. The mission of Emily Test is to ensure that no other student ends up in Emily's shoes. And that sits in my heart today as we, I think, bring our remarks to a close before we hear from the Minister, that yes, we can look at the data, we can look at the legal arguments, but we know that it's these human stories that really do have impact and change behaviours. So I hope by speaking today that I put on record my support for the motion that went to public petitions, the motion today, and that we can all work together to work with the Scottish Government to get the change that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. And I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And firstly, I want to thank Claire Baker for bringing this important issue of non-fatal strangulation to the Chamber today. I've certainly had the opportunity over the last few years to engage with Ms Baker on this matter, and that has certainly led to further Scottish Government activity in terms of exploring solutions, and I will come to that later in my remarks. Secondly, I also want to acknowledge the contributions of Michelle Thompson, Tess White, Carol Mockin, Liam Kerr, Polly McNeill and Monica Lennon in today's debate. But principally, I do also wish to pay tribute to survivors and also the researchers, as well as Fiona Drew, who have also had the pleasure of meeting. And we should also acknowledge the work done by 2 parliamentary committees in terms of the Petitions Committee and the evidence that the Criminal Justice Committee took in and around this debate. I think we are all horrified by the scale of this issue, and as many speakers have acknowledged today, non-fatal strangulation is extremely harmful. Choking reduces the flow of oxygen and can therefore cause damage to the brain as well as to the windpipe. And alongside the physical risks, anxiety, depression, loneliness are often associated with experiencing non-fatal strangulation. And non-fatal strangulation is also used mainly by men to exert coercive control within relationships. Claire Baker spoke of that total control that some men seek. And there is evidence, again, that others have acknowledged, that those men are also more likely to carry out severe violence. And a few speakers today have spoke about how non-fatal strangulation is indeed a red flag. Presiding Officer, last month Parliament debated 16 days of activism highlighting men's violence against women and girls. And as many of us have acknowledged today, Scotland does have world-renowned domestic abuse legislation which addresses the dynamics of coercive and controlling behaviour. Yes, I will, of course.
Tess White.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for taking an intervention. I hear what you say, and I'm glad you've referenced the Criminal Justice Committee. But has the Cabinet Secretary reviewed the latest evidence from December, where the professors looked at the US, which introduced non-fatal strangulation as a standalone crime, state by state by state? And the evidence is clear that they demonstrated there was a clear correlation that creating it as a standalone crime did actually reduce deaths. And I think the reason for the debate today is because of that compelling evidence. And if the Cabinet Secretary hasn't reviewed the data with the professors, will she?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware of that evidence. Claire Baker, in her opening remarks, spoke about the importance of us all to engage with the evidence. What I will do later in my remarks, I will reflect on the current position in Scotland in terms of Scots law and some of the concerns that have been obliquely referenced by speakers, but also to outline the action that the Scottish Government does take forward, because we don't have a closed mind on this issue, although given some of the evidence that came to the Criminal Justice Committee, I think there are aspects that do need to be considered and considered further. The first point I wanted to acknowledge, Presiding Officer, in terms of what else needs done, is that I do acknowledge that it is clearly very important that we have the means to identify cases of non-fatal strangulation in order to address this aspect of abuse of women and girls. And I know that everyone in this chamber is committed to taking whatever action is needed to address such abuse. And that, of course, includes societal and cultural change to address the factors that risk normalising this behaviour. For example, we have agreed the new offences in the UK Crime and Policing Bill criminalising pornography featuring strangulation or suffocation, and that will extend to Scotland if passed. I also welcome updated NHS Inform web pages which include clear information on non-fatal strangulation, highlighting that there is no safe way to be strangled and that it is a criminal offence to cause harm through strangulation. Presiding Officer, if I can now turn to the proposal for a stand-alone offence. Of course, briefly.
Monica Lennon.
Grateful before the Cabinet moves on to the next point. I appreciate the efforts that are being made, and NHS Forum website is always worth a visit, but I'm just not sure we're getting a huge number of 16, 17, 18-year-olds going there. So given that we have this growing trend, which is worrying all of us, what more can government do to get out the message there is no safe way to strangle or be strangled? How do we get this into our classrooms, get it out onto social media in a more positive way? What other levers can government pull that we can support government with?
Cabinet Secretary.
So Ms Lennon raises an important point. So the work that goes on in schools in terms of equally safe and the curriculum input in regards to healthy relationships, which of course focuses a lot these days on the importance of consent. But I will pick up further on this issue in terms of the consultation that we will be taking forward, but also the survey information that Ms Baker and I have engaged on as well, and the point about online harms, in particular in relation to intimate images, will be a factor in terms of the forthcoming consultation. In terms of the stand-alone offence, just by way of background, Presiding Officer, I know that members are aware that the UK Parliament has legislated for a specific offence of non-fatal strangulation in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. I think it is important to recognise that this was mainly to address a very specific issue in those jurisdictions where non-fatal strangulation that did not result in visible injury could only be prosecuted using the statutory offence of common assault, carrying a maximum penalty of 6 months imprisonment. And understandably, that was something that those jurisdictions wished to address. Now, in terms of Scots law, as it currently stands, I do wish to reiterate that non-fatal strangulation is already criminal in Scotland and can be dealt with using a range of offences. And I do think that is an important message to reiterate. It doesn't mean that minds are closed or that there isn't further action to take forward. But in terms of Ms Lennon's point about education and giving out those correct societal messages, it's important to be clear that non-fatal strangulation is already a criminal offence. And this includes, the offences include common law assault with penalties up to life imprisonment, sexual assault with penalties up to life imprisonment, and part of a course of conduct prosecuted as a domestic abuse offence with penalties up to 14 years imprisonment. Now, the Crown Office, as independent prosecutors, are clear they approach non-fatal strangulation seriously and that they use these laws where the evidence supports it. Another important factor, Presiding Officer, is that in contrast with the law in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it is important to note that in Scotland there is no defence of consent to strangulation. And that is a significant feature on how Scots law offers better protection. And again, that is an important message to get out to our society and communities that there is no defence of consent to strangulation. While I understand and respect deeply the views that creating a specific offence could send a message about the unacceptability of non-fatal strangulation and could help measure its prevalence, and actually recognise that these are important factors and they are powerful factors and they're, by their very nature, powerful arguments. What I want to guard against is any risk of unintended consequences. And I say this in light of the evidence highlighted by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and their evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee last year for a specific offence as distinct from assault, because there would need to be corroboration specifically of the strangulation and not simply the assault or domestic abuse. And we've already heard from members today that one of the salient issues with non-fatal strangulation is that it often leaves no visible signs. Yet the concerns raised by the Crown Office is that in relation to a specific offence that corroboration would still be required. And this may mean, and I say may mean, that creating a specific offence would in fact underestimate the true prevalence, as cases involving non-fatal strangulation might continue to be prosecuted as assault, sexual assault or domestic abuse. Presiding Officer, I do wish to stress that this is an issue that I and this Government take seriously. Whilst existing laws operate well in protecting victims and dealing with perpetrators, nonetheless we will shortly publish a public consultation to seek views on this area of law as set out in our programme of government, and again to continue to engage with views but also to engage with the evidence. That consultation will also, as I mentioned, include looking at online harms, particularly in relation to intimate images, but also spiking and statutory aggravation offences against pregnant women and the prosecutorial powers to impose non-harassment.
Cabinet Secretary, I appreciate there's a lot of information to impart on this very, very important matter, but you are really quite considerably over your time. Thank you.
Sorry, forgive me. Forgive me.
No, I'm afraid there isn't, because we're running fairly late now.
Okay. So, Presiding Officer, I agree with the sentiment that's in the motion that non-fatal strangulation should not go unrecorded. I've spoke in detail about the consultation, and my final piece of information for Parliament, Presiding Officer, is as a result of the engagement with Ms Baker, is that alongside the consultation on data collection in the justice system, the 25-26 Scottish Crime and Justice Survey also includes, for the first time, questions in relation to non-fatal strangulation, and that fieldwork is due to finish in March this year, and initial results are expected to be included in the 26-27 main findings report. So if I can just conclude, Presiding Officer, by thanking members for their contribution, and this is an issue, a serious issue that as a government will continue to engage in.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m. Thank you.